gathered on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Nation. I'm thrilled to hear about all the great work happening in our country on the issue of violence towards women and girls, and I'm thrilled to be here as a true partner in that work. I'll start with the YWCA Canada, which is as important today as it was a century ago. And they have a long history of serving women and family in needs, providing personal safety and shelters, well being and economic security for women. And they are the creators of the Rose Campaign to End Violence Against Women, inspired by the Rose Button created after the murders at l'École Polytechnique de Montréal in 1989. So we often say that violence against women and girls is a complex problem, but what does that really mean? And I think, we heard quite a bit about some of the interwoven social determinants of health, but I'd like to tell you a short story about what one of the most profound examples that I heard in my history. And this was a particular woman who was living in a low-income way on social assistance, had in fact had a restraining order against her partner who had been abusing her for some time. He came to her apartment, somehow managed to get her himself locked in the bathroom and would not leave. She phoned 911. The police came. They kicked down the door to remove him. And now the door was damaged. And she didn't have the money to pay the arrears and the repair for the door. And so after some wrangling with the social assistance agency, she was finally evicted. And so for a short time, she had support to stay in a hotel with her two children. But shortly after that, there were no affordable housing units, and she was on the bottom of the waiting list, and she had this debt to pay back to the social assistance agency for the damaged door. And so in the long story short, she ended up losing her children and taking a year to regain her financial capacity to pay the debt and gain her children back. And we can only imagine what happened during the year in those children's lives. And so I use this story as an example because it's often so interwoven with things like housing and social assistance structures and bureaucracies that don't understand the risk necessarily or don't have the mechanisms to address the risk. And we can see how these things become intergenerational. Because when you lose your children, in her case, she was fortunate enough to be able to, and I say fortunate in the most respectful of ways, but fortunate enough to get her children back. But many women cannot. And they spiral closer and closer and closer to homelessness. And then that's when I would see them in my door. Violence creates chaos in people's lives, disrupts their ability to meet their basic needs. Its effects are long-lasting, intergenerational. This issue is very personal to me. It's professional and it's personal. I also come from poverty, and I've danced around the issue of personal violence and issues in my life and in my peers' lives as I grew up. So I've known women on a both personal level and a professional level. Unless we think it only happens to women in poverty, let's remind ourselves that in fact it happens to women across the socioeconomic spectrum. It's just the resources to deal with the outcomes and the aftermath are so much more restrictive for women living in poverty.